The girl's scream died in her throat before it could echo through the limestone corridors. Not because someone silenced her, though hands would come for that purpose soon enough, but because she had learned, as all the temple virgins learned, that screaming only made it worse. Her name was Nefret. She was 14 years old, and in exactly 3 hours, when the moon reached its apex over the sanctuary of Hathor, she would discover why the other girls whispered prayers not for salvation, but for the mercy of a swift death before the priests could claim what they believed was divinely owed to them. This is not a story about ancient Egypt's glory. This is a story about what lurked in the shadows of that glory, in the sacred spaces where power, piety, and predation became so entangled that victims learned to call their suffering holy. Before we descend into the depths of this darkness, I need you to understand something. These stories matter. They must be told, remembered, and never sanitized. If you want more deep dives into the histories they don't teach in schools, the uncomfortable truths hiding behind monuments and mythology, then follow this channel. Hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera rose from the desert like a prayer carved in stone, its columns thick as ancient cedars, its walls adorned with images of gods and kings locked in eternal celestial dance. At dawn, when the first light struck the hypostyle hall, the hieroglyphs seemed to move, writhing serpents, spreading wings, eyes that followed you through the shadows. It should have been beautiful. Nefret remembered thinking that once. On the day her father delivered her to the temple gates, his face carefully blank, his hands trembling as he placed the ceremonial lotus flower in her small palm. She had gazed up at those towering walls and felt something like awe. "You are blessed," he had whispered, and she heard the lie in his voice even then, though she didn't yet understand why a blessing should sound so much like a goodbye. That was 4 years ago. 4 years of learning the hymns and the rituals, the proper way to pour libations and arrange offerings, the intricate dance steps that honored the goddess of love, music, and motherhood. 4 years of watching older girls disappear into the inner sanctum with the high priest and his circle, returning hours later with vacant eyes and movements like broken dolls. 4 years of pretending not to notice the blood. The temple complex was vast, a maze of courtyards and chapels, underground crypts and rooftop sanctuaries, secret passages known only to the initiated. 300 souls lived within its walls, priests ranked by arcane hierarchies, scribes who recorded every offering and prophecy, servants who maintained the sacred spaces, and the girls. Always the girls. They called them the Temple of Hathor, the servants of Hathor. Virgins consecrated to the goddess, selected from families who could not afford the temple tax, or who owed debts to the priesthood that could only be paid in flesh. Some came willingly, seduced by promises of divine favor and comfortable lives. Most came because they had no choice. Nefret had been purchased for 3 sacks of grain during a drought year. The girls lived in a separate wing, a labyrinth of small cells arranged around a central courtyard where a pool reflected the sky. They were given fine linen dresses, jewelry of copper and faience, cosmetics made from malachite and coal. They ate better than peasants, slept on proper beds rather than reed mats, learned to read and write, privileges reserved for the elite. They were gilded cages, these privileges. Beautiful chains. The youngest girls, those under 12, were relatively safe, used only for public ceremonies and daytime rituals. They sang hymns in the outer courts, carried flowers in processions, learned the sacred dances. But once a girl began to bleed, once her body announced its readiness for womanhood, everything changed. That's when the priests began to watch. Nefret's first blood had come 6 months ago, staining her white linen dress during morning prayers. The other girls had gone silent, their eyes full of terrible knowledge. The priestess who oversaw their quarters, an ancient woman named Harriet, whose face was a topography of wrinkles, had taken Nefret aside, cleaned her, given her cloths and instructions. And then, in a voice like sand scraping stone, "Now you must be careful, child. Be very careful." Nefret hadn't understood. Not then. She understood now. The Temple of Hathor was built like a body. The public spaces were its face, beautiful and welcoming. But the deeper you went, the more disturbing it became. The inner chambers were muscle and bone, the crypts below were organs, and the secret rooms where the high priest conducted his mysteries were the hidden infections that the body worked desperately to conceal. The high priest's name was Waset. He had held the position for 23 years, appointed during the reign of Ptolemy VIII, when Egyptian religion and Greek influence were locked in an uneasy marriage that produced strange offspring. He was 56 years old, with a shaved head that gleamed with scented oils, eyes rimmed with kohl that made them seem larger and more predatory, and hands adorned with rings that clicked together when he gestured, a sound all the girls had learned to dread. He moved through the temple like a crocodile through water, silent, patient, always watching. There were 12 senior priests beneath him, men who had risen through decades of service, who knew every ritual and recipe, every prayer and prohibition. They wore leopard skins during ceremonies, the spotted pelts draped over their shoulders like the authority of ancient power. They carried staffs of office, symbols of their rank. They spoke with the voices of gods. And they were monsters, not all of them. Some were true believers, men who had genuinely devoted themselves to the divine mysteries, who saw their role as sacred intermediaries between humanity and the cosmos. But those men were either blind to what happened in the deeper chambers, or they convinced themselves that certain sacrifices were necessary for maintaining cosmic order. The others, perhaps 6 of the 12, were predators who had found the perfect hunting ground. They used theology as a weapon. They would cite ancient texts, obscure passages about sacred marriages between gods and mortals, about how the goddess required pure vessels to receive divine essence, about how a virgin's energy could be channeled and transformed through ritual union with the priesthood, who served as earthly avatars of the divine masculine. It was all lies wrapped in liturgy, but the lies were powerful because they were official, recorded in sacred texts, supported by centuries of tradition. The lies were powerful because they came from men who controlled access to the gods, who decided what offerings were acceptable, who interpreted omens and dreams, who held the power to curse or bless entire families. The lies were powerful because questioning them meant blasphemy, and blasphemy meant death. The temple's architecture itself enabled the abuse. There were rooms within rooms, passages that led to dead ends or to chambers whose doors could only be opened from the outside. The crypts beneath the main temple, carved from the living rock, cool and dark and utterly soundproof, contained altars and beds and implements whose purposes were carefully obscured in official documents. They called one such chamber the House of Life. The irony was not lost on the girls. They didn't simply take the girls by force. That would have been too obvious, too crude. Instead, they cultivated them, shaped them, transformed their understanding of reality until violation became sacrament. It began with small things. A priest would single out a girl during lessons, praising her voice or her grace, telling her she had a special quality, a divine spark. He would give her small gifts, a lotus flower, a pretty stone, a piece of honeycomb. He would engage her in conversations about the mysteries, about the deep secrets of the cosmos that only the initiated could understand. He would make her feel chosen. Then came the private lessons. "You have been selected for advanced training," they would tell her. "The goddess has marked you for a sacred purpose." They would teach her secret names of deities, show her hidden inscriptions, take her into restricted areas of the temple. Each step deeper felt like an honor, a progression toward something magnificent. By the time the girl realized what was happening, she was already trapped. The priests were masters of manipulation. They understood how to read their victims, how to identify which girls would respond to affection, which to authority, which to the promise of special status. They knew how to isolate their targets, turning them against the other girls by making them feel superior, chosen, different. And they used the most powerful tool of all, the fear of divine punishment. If you refuse the sacred rite, they would whisper, the goddess will be angered. Your family will suffer. Your village will face drought and disease. The cosmic order itself will be disturbed by your selfishness, your failure to fulfill your sacred duty. They made the girls believe that their pain was necessary, that their suffering prevented greater suffering, that their violation was, in fact, their salvation. Some girls broke under this psychological assault, becoming compliant, docile, their spirits so thoroughly crushed that they moved through the temple like ghosts. Others found ways to dissociate, to send their minds elsewhere while their bodies endured. A few, the strongest, or perhaps the most damaged, learned to play the game, to become skilled at predicting what the priests wanted and giving it to them with just enough enthusiasm to be rewarded with privileges or protections. And some girls tried to escape. The temple walls were high but not impossible to scale. The gates were guarded, but guards could be bribed or distracted. There were always stories of girls who had tried to run, stories that ended with recapture and punishment so severe that they served as permanent warnings to the others. One girl, Meritamen, had made it all the way to the river before they found her. They brought her back and conducted a purification ritual that lasted 3 days. No one ever heard her scream because they gagged her, but everyone heard the descriptions afterward, carefully shared by the priests to ensure maximum deterrent effect. She hanged herself a week later. Her body was found in the morning, swaying gently from a roof beam in the storage room, her face purple, her eyes bulging. The priests declared it a tragedy, a sign that evil spirits had possessed her. They performed elaborate exorcism rituals, cleansed the space, and ordered the other girls to pray for her tormented soul. No one spoke about why she had done it. No one dared. The summons came on a night when the desert wind howled against the temple walls, carrying sand that hissed against the limestone like whispered warnings. A junior priest appeared at the entrance to the girls' quarters, his face carefully neutral. Nefret, daughter of Pakhom, you are called to the Chamber of Mysteries. The goddess has chosen you for a sacred rite. The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples of reaction through the room. The other girls went still, their eyes carefully averted. Only Sadeh, who had survived 2 years of the sacred rites, and now moved like a woman underwater, met Nefret's gaze. Her look said everything. I'm sorry. There's nothing anyone can do. May you be strong. Nefret's hands trembled as she stood. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might tear free from her chest and flutter away like a panicked bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to scream. But her body obeyed the conditioning of 4 years, moving mechanically toward her fate. They had prepared her for this, in their way. For months the priests had been watching her, commenting on her grace, her beauty, her spiritual maturity. They had given her special tasks, allowed her into restricted areas, taught her secret prayers. They had made her feel honored. Now she understood what that honor truly meant. The priest led her through the darkening temple, past the great hall where the evening offerings had been completed, past the chapels dedicated to lesser deities, through a narrow passage that descended into the heart of the complex. Torches flickered in wall sconces, casting shadows that seemed to reach for her with grasping fingers. The temperature dropped as they descended. The air grew thick with incense, myrrh and frankincense, meant to purify and sanctify, but to Nefret it smelled like a funeral. They reached a bronze door carved with images of Hathor in her aspect as Sekhmet, the lion-headed destroyer. The priest knocked 3 times, and the door swung open from within. The Chamber of Mysteries was exactly as the other girls had described in their fragmented, traumatized whispers. A circular room carved from bedrock, its walls painted with scenes of divine unions between gods and mortals, its floor inlaid with a labyrinth pattern in black and white stone. At the center stood an altar, not the kind used for offerings, but a stone platform draped with fine linen, surrounded by braziers that filled the space with sweet-smelling smoke. 7 priests stood in a circle around the altar. Kayemwaset, the high priest, stood at its head. He wore the full regalia of his office, the leopard skin, the golden collar, the ceremonial beard of authority. His eyes, rimmed with kohl and reflecting the firelight, looked like pits leading to some unfathomable darkness. "Welcome, child," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Tonight you will be transformed. Tonight you will fulfill your sacred purpose and become a vessel for the divine." The words were practiced, perfect, terrible. Nefret wanted to speak, to protest, to invoke some law or custom that might save her. But she had been taught too well. She knew there were no laws here, no customs that would protect her. The only law was the will of the priesthood. The only custom was submission. One of the priests stepped forward with a cup, golden, studded with gems, filled with dark liquid. "Drink," he commanded. "This is the nectar of the gods. It will ease your transition into the mysteries." Nefret recognized the cup. She had seen other girls drink from it, watched them become pliant and confused, their resistance dissolving into docile acceptance. The drink was drugged with some combination of herbs, perhaps poppy or mandrake, substances that stole will and memory. This was the moment. This was where she had to choose. She could drink and disappear into the fog, let whatever happened happen without full awareness, emerge on the other side broken but perhaps not completely shattered. Or she could refuse and face their wrath fully conscious, fight and lose, suffer more but remain herself. The other girls had told her, "Take the drink, it's easier, you'll barely remember." But Nefret looked at Kayemwaset's expectant face, at the predatory patience in his eyes, and something inside her hardened into diamond-sharp clarity. She thought of Meritamen swinging from that rope. She thought of Sade's hollow eyes. She thought of all the girls who had passed through this chamber, all the screams that had died in these soundproof walls, all the pain that had been called holy. And she made a choice. Nefret took the cup. She raised it to her lips as the priests watched, satisfied, already imagining what would come next. She tilted it as if to drink, and then, with all the force her small frame could muster, she hurled the golden vessel at Kayemwaset's face. It struck his forehead with a crack that echoed like thunder in the confined space. The drugged wine exploded across his features, staining his fine white linen, dripping from his ceremonial beard. Blood welled from a gash above his eye. For one crystalline moment, the world stopped. The priests stood frozen, their brains struggling to process what had just happened. This was not in the script. This was not how the ritual went. No girl had ever... Nefret ran. She bolted for the door, her bare feet slapping against stone, her breath coming in gasps. Behind her, she heard Kayemwaset's roar of rage, heard the priests scrambling into motion, heard the sound of pursuit. But she had one advantage. She knew the temple. 4 years of memorizing its passages, its shortcuts, its hiding places. She knew which corridors led to dead ends and which ones opened into escape routes. She knew where the night guards stationed themselves and when they changed shifts. She ran like a demon was chasing her, because it was. Through the passage, upstairs carved so steep they were almost a ladder, into the main hall where moonlight streamed through high windows. She could hear them behind her, their heavy footsteps, their angry shouts. They would catch her. Of course they would catch her. But she would make them work for it. She would make them face the fact that she had resisted, that she had said no, that their carefully constructed theology of divine necessity was nothing more than a lie to justify their depravity. She burst into the courtyard where the girls slept. Every face turned toward her. 30 girls in various stages of sleep, startled awake by the commotion. They saw her wild eyes, her desperate flight, and they understood immediately what was happening. "They're coming!" Nefret gasped. "They're coming for me, and one day they'll come for all of you. We are not holy offerings. We are not blessed. We are being devoured." The words hung in the air like a spell. Some girls looked away, too frightened to acknowledge the truth. But others, perhaps a dozen, met her eyes. And in their faces, Nefret saw something she had never expected to find in this place of careful submission. She saw rage. Sade was the first to stand. Despite everything they had done to her, despite the deadness in her eyes, some spark had survived. She moved to Nefret's side, her body positioning itself as a shield. Then another girl stood, and another. By the time Khaemwaset and his priests burst into the courtyard, 12 girls had formed a circle around Nefret, their faces set in expressions of defiance that looked strange on features trained for submission. "Stand aside," Khaemwaset commanded, his voice still authoritative despite the blood streaming down his face. "This girl has blasphemed against the goddess. She has violated sacred law. She will be punished." "No," said Sade, and her voice, so long silent, rang out clear and strong. "No more." The confrontation might have turned violent then. The priests were larger, stronger, armed with the authority of centuries. They could have beaten the girls down, dragged Nefret away, punished them all. But they had made one critical miscalculation. The commotion had awakened others. Servants had emerged from their quarters. Junior priests, some of them genuinely pious men who had never participated in the mysteries, stood in doorways, watching with growing horror as they realized what was truly happening. Guards had arrived, drawn by the chaos, and one other figure had appeared, the priestess Heret, the ancient woman who oversaw the girls' quarters. She shuffled into the courtyard, her walking stick tapping against stone, her age-clouded eyes taking in the scene. For long moments, she said nothing, and Nefret felt hope die in her chest. This woman had always known and had done nothing. But then Heret spoke, her voice crackling like dry papyrus. "Khaemwaset, High Priest, Servant of Hathor." Each title fell like an accusation. "The goddess sees all. Did you think she did not see this?" The courtyard went silent. "I am old," Heret continued. "I am dying. I have perhaps a month, perhaps a week, before I stand before the true gods and answer for my life. And I will not meet them with this sin on my soul." She turned to the assembled crowd. "These men have profaned the temple. They have taken what is meant to be sacred and made it filth. They have called their lusts holy and their crimes necessary. They have violated these children and called it divine service." "Silence, old woman," Khaemwaset snarled. "You are mad with age." "I am a priestess of 40 years, Heret interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I hold knowledge of every ritual, every ceremony, every true teaching of this temple. And I say before all assembled here, there is no sacred text that commands what these men have done. There is no divine law that requires the defilement of children. They have invented their theology to justify their depravity." The words detonated like bombs in the courtyard. Some of the junior priests looked stunned, as if pieces were clicking into place, as if explanations they had accepted without question were suddenly revealing themselves as lies. The guards shifted uncomfortably, hands moving to weapons not in threat but in confusion about what was being threatened. Khaemwaset realized he was losing control. "This is a conspiracy," he declared. "These females have been possessed by Set, the destroyer. They seek to tear down the sacred order. The only possession here," Heret cut him off, "is your possession of power you have abused." She turned to the guards. "Seize them. Seize these men. Take them to confinement until proper authorities can investigate." The guards hesitated. These were priests, holy men, representatives of divine authority. But they were also just men, men who had been caught red-handed chasing a terrified child, men whose guilt was written on their faces, men whose defense was growing weaker by the moment. The captain of the guard, a scarred veteran named Passer, made the decision. "Take them," he ordered his men. "We'll sort this out in the morning with clear heads and proper procedures." It should have been over then, but Khaemwaset was not a man who accepted defeat. What happened next became legend in the temple, a story whispered for generations, though never officially recorded. As the guards moved to seize him, Kayemwaset reached into his robes and produced a small knife, not a weapon, but a ritual blade used for cutting offerings. In one swift motion, he grabbed the nearest girl, a child of perhaps 11 named Bekataten, and pressed the blade to her throat. "You will let me pass," he said calmly, "or I will send this innocent to the afterlife and call it a sacrifice to appease the goddess's wrath." The courtyard froze. The blade pressed harder, and a thin line of blood appeared on Bekataten's neck. Her eyes were wide with terror, her body rigid. "You will let me pass," Kamwaset repeated, "and you will forget everything that happened here tonight. Or I will kill her, and then I will kill another, and another, until you remember your proper place." For a moment, it seemed he might win. The guards pulled back. The priests stood watching, some with satisfaction, others with horror. Even Nefret seemed uncertain. But Nefret, standing in her circle of protectors, felt something crystallize inside her. She had run, she had fought, she had spoken truth. And now she understood that truth required one more sacrifice. She stepped forward. "Take me instead," she said quietly. "I'm the one who struck you. I'm the one who blasphemed. Let her go and take me. Do whatever you want to me, but let these others be safe." Kayemwaset's eyes gleamed with triumph. "You see," he called out, "the guilty one confesses. Justice will be served after all." But Nefret wasn't done. "I want everyone here to hear this," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I want every guard, every priest, every servant to hear what I say now. When he takes me, when he does what he's going to do, remember, I am 14 years old. I am a child. And what he does to me is not divine will. It is not sacred duty. It is not cosmic necessity." She locked eyes with Kamwaset. "It is rape. It is murder of the spirit, if not the body. It is the act of a man who has confused his own desires with the voice of God. And every person who allows it, who witnesses it and does nothing, who accepts it as necessary, you are complicit. You are guilty. And one day, whether in this life or the next, you will answer for it." The words echoed in the courtyard. Undeniable, impossible to unhear. Kamwaset's hand trembled. His carefully constructed worldview, the elaborate theological framework that had allowed him to commit atrocities while sleeping soundly at night, cracked. Because Nefret had done something he could not counter. She had named the thing simply, stripped away all the sacred language and mystical justification, and revealed it for what it was. And everyone heard. The captain of the guard had heard. The junior priests had heard. The servants had heard. Most importantly, the other girls had heard, and the spell of sacred inevitability that had kept them compliant for so long shattered. "No," said Sada, stepping forward to stand beside Nefret. "No," said another girl, joining them. "No," said another, and another, until all 30 girls stood together, a wall of refusal. The guards, seeing this, seeing children find courage that armed men lacked, felt shame burn in their chests. Passer, the captain, had daughters of his own. He thought of them, imagined them in this place, and something in him broke and reformed in an instant. "Kayemwaset," he said, his voice hard as granite, "release the child. Now, or I will order my men to fill you with arrows, and we'll call it divine justice." For a long moment, Kayemwaset stood at the crossroads. He could surrender, face judgment, lose everything. Or he could kill the girl, precipitate a massacre, and go down in blood and chaos. His hand trembled on the knife. Then Nefret spoke one more time, her ancient voice cutting through the tension. "The goddess you claim to serve is Hathor. Hathor the beautiful, Hathor the joyful. Hathor who protects women in childbirth and celebrates love and music and life." She paused. "Do you truly believe she would want this? Do you truly believe your actions honor her? Or have you spent so long listening to your own voice that you've forgotten what divine truth actually sounds like?" The blade fell from Kamwaset's hand. It clattered on the stone, a small sound that somehow seemed deafening. Bekataten scrambled away, running to the safety of the other girls. Kamwaset stood alone, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: rage, shame, fear, defiance. The guards seized him. As they dragged him away, he looked back at Nefret with eyes full of venom. "You have destroyed everything," he hissed. "The cosmic order requires balance. The gods demand sacrifice. Without the rituals, without the sacred unions, chaos will reign. You will see. You will all see." Nefret met his gaze steadily. "The only chaos here is the chaos you created by calling evil good. The only imbalance is the one you imposed by taking what was never yours to take. And if the gods truly demanded what you claim, then they are not gods worth serving." The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the corruption. Not every priest was guilty. Some had genuinely believed the theological justifications. Others had suspected but lacked evidence or courage to act. But of the 12 senior priests, 6 were found to have directly participated in systematic abuse spanning decades. The records the scribes had so carefully maintained, the lists of purification rituals and sacred unions, the schedule of which girls were honored with which priests, became evidence of conspiracy. Kamwaset and 5 others were stripped of their positions and handed over to secular authorities. Under Ptolemaic law, they faced execution. The punishment was carried out within a month. Their bodies denied proper burial, their names struck from temple records. It should have been a triumph. But the truth was more complicated. The temple's reputation was destroyed. Donations dried up. Many of the girls, traumatized beyond healing, were returned to families who didn't want them or couldn't afford to keep them. Some disappeared into prostitution or slavery, their lives ruined by the very men who had claimed to sanctify them. Harriet died 3 weeks after the confrontation, as if she had held on just long enough to witness justice. They buried her with full honors, and the surviving girls placed lotus flowers on her grave. Nefret was offered freedom, but she chose to stay, not as a virgin consecrated to service, but as a teacher. She dedicated herself to ensuring that every girl who passed through the temple walls understood her worth, her autonomy, her right to refuse. She taught them to read, to think, to question authority, to recognize manipulation. She became, in her way, a priestess of truth. The Temple of Hathor never recovered its former glory. Within a generation, it would decline, eventually abandoned to the desert sand. Archaeologists would later excavate it, marveling at its beauty, writing papers about its architecture and art, never quite understanding the darkness that had festered in its depth. But they found one thing in a hidden chamber, a cache of pottery shards on which dozens of girls had scratched messages over the years. Brief prayers, fragments of poems, again and again, the same phrase, "Remember us." Why did the temple virgins of Egypt fear the priests more than death itself? Because death is simple. Death is an ending, clean and absolute. But what the priests offered was worse than death. It was a living death, a death of the self while the body continued to breathe. It was the corruption of everything that should have been sacred, the weaponization of faith against the faithful. They feared the priests because the priests had built a perfect trap, a system where resistance meant blasphemy, where refusal meant divine punishment, where speaking truth meant destruction. They had created a theology that made predation holy and suffering sacred. And the most terrifying thing? This wasn't unique to one temple in ancient Egypt. This pattern has repeated throughout human history, in every culture, in every era, wherever power and faith intersect without accountability. Different gods, different rituals, different rationalizations, but the same fundamental crime. The temple virgins feared the priests more than death because the priests had learned to call evil good and to punish anyone who dared to see clearly. Nefret's act of resistance didn't end all abuse. It didn't heal all wounds. It didn't even prevent similar crimes from happening elsewhere, But it did one crucial thing. It broke the spell of inevitability. It proved that the constructed theology of necessary suffering was a lie. It demonstrated that speaking truth, even at great cost, could shatter systems that seemed eternal. The priestess Herod was right. The gods see all, but humans must choose to look. And once they truly see, once they acknowledge what's been hidden in plain sight, dressed in ceremonial robes and justified by sacred texts, they can choose to say that simple, powerful word that Nefret and the others finally spoke. No. The girls who scratched "Remember Us" on those pottery shards have been remembered. Their names are lost to history, but their truth survives. And perhaps that's the real legacy. Not monuments of stone, but the enduring knowledge that even in the darkest corners of power, resistance is possible. Silence can be broken, and the vulnerable, when they stand together, become unbreakable. Some stories must be told, no matter how uncomfortable. Some truths must be spoken, no matter how they disturb our images of the past. Because the alternative, forgetting, sanitizing, looking away, is how the patterns perpetuate. The temple virgins feared the priests more than death itself, but in the end, they feared silence more than anything. And so they spoke.